Arnold Schwarzenegger stood on the gubernatorial campaign podium in California, bathing in the brilliant glow of starlight and the American dream, a perfect embodiment of a self-made titan. The Hollywood elite had cast him in pure gold, and a political dynasty possessing the bluest blood in America had granted him their sacred blessing. To the global public, he was the invincible, bulletproof hero on the silver screen and a flawless, untainted family man in real life. Yet, behind this heavily fortified steel wall named the Honorable Governor of California, lay a naked, terrifying reality. A massive empire composed of studio executives, media orchestrators, and crisis management experts had collaborated to operate a magnificent machinery of grand illusions. They were entirely willing to sacrifice the honor, the voices, and the fragile lives of vulnerable women simply to nourish a biological monster that generated astronomical profits reaching hundreds of millions of dollars. Where we dissect the darkest corridors of power and fame. But before that golden mirage collapsed in a cataclysmic media explosion, how did a penniless, impoverished immigrant from rural Austria manage to construct such an unyielding fortress of silence? How were his darkest sins permitted to exist, breathing the exact same air as the highest echelons of American political power? Imagine marrying a biological niece of the legendary President John F. Kennedy, naturally inheriting the ultimate master key to enter a political clan that symbolized American royalty, only to later transform your luxurious Pacific Palisades mansion into the main stage for a ridiculous domestic comedy that lasted for multiple decades. Imagine a system so inherently corrupt that major film studios and political brokers willingly stepped in to extinguish every whisper and suffocate every allegation of harassment, solely to ensure that the box office cash registers never stopped ringing, and the election ballots kept falling into the boxes. They were not merely marketing a mainstream movie star, they were weaponizing systemic power and capital to sculpt a bulletproof deity. From the authoritarian shadows of a tiny post-war Austrian village to the ultimate betrayal in 1997, where an illegitimate child was secretly born just days after his official son entered the world, this is a psychological autopsy of supreme human hubris. Stay with us as we shatter the myth of Arnold Schwarzenegger, a chilling tale of muscle, money, and a complicit upper class that happily traded human souls as collateral for systemic dominance. To truly comprehend the ruthless, dictatorial precision with which Arnold Schwarzenegger operated his fortress of absolute silence, one must first travel back in time to dissect the profound structural cracks in his very foundation. For Arnold, that foundation was not built upon the sturdy bricks of a functional, happy family. Rather, it was molded by suffocating layers of generational trauma and domestic tyranny. He did not enter this world on the gritty, opportunity-filled streets of New York or Los Angeles. Arnold stepped into existence in 1947 within a poverty-stricken village named Thal in post-war Austria, where the heavy shadows of defeat and starvation loomed over every single household. The young Arnold grew up under the totalitarian surveillance of his father, Gustav Schwarzenegger, a former police chief who possessed a complex past of serving within the wartime military apparatus. This patriarch governed the household with extreme cruelty, transforming the home into a miniature military barracks where physical beatings and psychological humiliation occurred as a daily routine. This pervasive fear and iron discipline injected a primitive, merciless doctrine into the adolescent Arnold's mind. In this world, the weak have no right to exist. They will be crushed without pity, and the only method to survive among predators is to convert oneself into a block of cold steel, completely isolated from ordinary human emotions. Arnold Schwarzenegger did not seek out the realm of bodybuilding due to a naive passion for sports or a healthy desire for a robust physique. To him, those swelling muscles and that heavy skeletal frame were a psychological suit of armor, a tangible tool of rebellion against his father's tyranny and the suffocating poverty of his homeland. When Arnold set foot on American soil, in the late 1960s, with nothing but a tattered gym bag, a meager amount of cash, and a fractured, barely comprehensible grasp of the English language, this young Austrian predator quickly sniffed out the ultimate rule of American capitalism. The free market possesses absolutely zero interest in your morality or character. It only cares whether you own a unique commodity ripe for exploitation. And Arnold realized that he was that exact commodity. He threw himself into training with a frightening, borderline psychotic intensity, conquering every prestigious title in the global bodybuilding arena, converting his unpronounceable name into an irreplaceable brand. But bodybuilding championships were merely the preliminary stepping stone in a grander psychological takeover. Arnold hungered for far more. He craved the undivided attention of millions, the absolute submission of the public, and, above all, the mountains of cash that only the cinematic cathedral of Hollywood could provide. The Hollywood empire of the 1980s was experiencing a burning, desperate thirst for raw, coarse masculine archetypes. Action heroes of pure muscle, who could violently salvage the world with firearms and fists to satisfy the geopolitical anxieties of the Cold War public. And Arnold Schwarzenegger materialized like a pagan god stepping out of Greek mythology, a biological entity possessing physical dimensions that completely eclipsed ordinary actors. Movies like Conan the Barbarian and The Terminator rapidly established Arnold as an uncrowned monarch of the global box office. Every single cinematic project featuring the name Schwarzenegger splashed across the promotional poster automatically meant hundreds of millions of dollars flowing directly into the bank accounts of major studios. However, behind those exhilarating action sequences and beneath the ecstatic roars of global fans, a dark, suffocating reality began to unfold within enclosed movie sets. Arnold, with a colossal ego pampered by unimaginable wealth and adulation, began to exhibit predatory sexual behaviors with absolute, nonchalant impunity. The whispers, the internal incident reports, and the explicit accusations from female crew members and co-stars regarding Arnold harassing, groping, or subjecting them to aggressive physical contact began to accumulate with terrifying frequency within the corridors of Hollywood's elite. Yet, when confronted with these cries for help, what did the leadership of the major studios choose to do? They initiated no formal investigations, they distributed no punishments, and they harbored absolutely no intention of protecting the traumatized women. Their response was a systematic, institutional cover-up. To the executive boards, Arnold was not a human being bound by conventional moral boundaries. He was a biological money-printing press. When an individual generates a profit margin so immense, the ethical standards and legal codes of society are instantly rendered obsolete by the sheer weight of capital. Hollywood actively engineered a zone of diplomatic immunity around Arnold, a protected vacuum where he could indulge his wildest, most primitive impulses without the slightest fear of retribution. The victims who emerged from those closed sets were instantly suffocated into silence with expensive settlement checks, accompanied by draconian non-disclosure agreements. Or they faced covert threats that their entire careers in the entertainment industry would be permanently erased if they dared utter a single syllable to the press. Hollywood had fabricated a deity, and to preserve their investment, they willingly transformed ordinary human beings into anonymous sacrifices. Nevertheless, the ambition of this Austrian muscle monster possessed no expiration date. The Hollywood box office remained far too small a pond for his insatiable appetite. Arnold Schwarzenegger craved a purer, more potent form of absolute power, political power, the kind that dictates the destiny of an entire nation rather than merely entertaining them for 2 hours. And to step into the elite circles of American politics, a foreign-born actor with a heavy, thick accent could not rely solely on bicep measurements or on-screens of firearms. He required the ultimate supreme diplomatic passport, and that lonely passport manifested in the form of a woman named Maria Shriver. The wedding of the century in 1986 between Arnold Schwarzenegger and Maria Shriver was completely devoid of a genuine romantic fairy tale. To Arnold's highly calculative brain, this was a strategic corporate merger, a lucrative investment into one of the most deeply influential political bloodlines in United States history, the Kennedy family. Maria Shriver was the biological niece of the martyred President John F. Kennedy, carrying the pure blue blood of a dynasty widely considered the unofficial royalty of America. Walking down the aisle with Maria Shriver instantly laundered every stain from Arnold's past, converting an action star, born in a poor Austrian village, into an aristocratic member of New England high society. The noble political lineage of the Kennedy name granted Arnold an impenetrable moral cloak before the public eye. The mainstream media worshipped them as the golden couple of the modern era, a flawless synthesis of Arnold's supreme physical power and Maria's elite intelligence and aristocratic refinement. Under the patronizing shield of the Kennedy brand, Arnold was no longer viewed as a crude, muscular brute. He had evolved into an icon of success, an exemplary family man, a devoted father, and an elite citizen eager to serve the state. The complicity of the media and the public was so profound that they voluntarily blinded themselves to glaring anomalies, actively refusing to believe any rumors that could jeopardize the monumental image of this power couple. But behind the heavy tight doors of their magnificent mansion in Pacific Palisades, a diametrically opposed reality was unfolding with systematic hypocrisy. At the exact moment Arnold was weaponizing his wife's reputation and her family's institutional heritage to pave his path toward the governor's mansion in California, this man began introducing his most primitive wild instincts directly into his own domestic sanctuary. He converted his home into a labyrinth of deceit, where a colossal machinery of lies was prepared to operate in the most frantic manner imaginable, defying all boundaries of human endurance and morality under the secure protection of an entire elite system. To truly comprehend the spectacular unraveling of an icon, we must now dive deep into the absolute zenith of Arnold Schwarzenegger's power, a chaotic period where the boundary separating a Hollywood deity from an elite apex predator was entirely erased beneath suffocating layers of money and political influence. By the time the world entered the 1990s, Arnold was no longer a mere cinematic asset generating millions for studio executives. He had evolved into an untouchable systemic institution. The toxic hubris nurtured by a childhood of relentless domestic bauhang and an adult career of borderline psychotic success had thoroughly convinced Arnold that the conventional moral codes of ordinary human society simply did not apply to his existence. This was the exact historical moment where the self-destruction algorithm of a deeply narcissistic brain began operating with quiet, merciless precision right inside his own domestic sanctuary. The Supreme Controller had willingly entered a dangerous psychological chess match, one where he openly challenged both the proud Kennedy bloodline of his wife, Maria Shriver, and the absolute loyalty of the multi-million-dollar protective apparatus surrounding him. The year 1997 materialized as a fatal crossroads, hosting one of the most grotesque farcical moral betrayals in the modern history of the American upper class. Within the heavily fortified walls of the Pacific Palisades mansion, a dark satirical comedy was being orchestrated that no mainstream Hollywood screenwriter could have ever dared to conceive. The Schwarzenegger household employed Mildred Baena, an immigrant woman from Guatemala, to serve as their housekeeper and domestic assistant. For over 2 decades, this woman quietly organized the elite bedrooms, prepared daily meals, and bore witness to the staggering architectural hypocrisy of California's ultimate power couple. But Arnold, driven by a primitive biological instinct and a profound contempt for basic familial boundaries, initiated a clandestine, multi-year affair with his own domestic employee. To Arnold, this was never a temporary lapse in judgment fueled by intoxication or impulse. It was a hostile psychological takeover of his wife's most sacred personal space. He casually converted the luxurious matrimonial bed, where a woman carrying the untouchable heritage of the Kennedy dynasty slept, into a stage for his primitive desires with a salaried worker. Arnold's supreme arrogance had reached such an astronomical level that he genuinely believed his capital and systemic dominance could rewrite material reality, turning an unpardonable domestic sin into a permanently buried secret. The absolute pinnacle of this ridiculous domestic farce unfolded in the late months of 1997, when both the aristocratic wife and the secret mistress were carrying Arnold's biological pieces at the exact same time. Imagine the immaculate public portrait of high society perfection manufactured for the mainstream media cameras. Maria Shriver gave birth to their official son, Christopher, on September 27, 1997, triggering waves of ecstatic celebration across the American political landscape and endless profiles praising their flawless family values. Yet, precisely 5 days later, on October 20, Mildred Baena gave birth to another son named Joseph Baena in a regular, low-profile community hospital. This illegitimate child carried the unmistakable DNA of the world's greatest bodybuilding champion, but on the birth certificate, the name of Mildred's estranged husband was hastily written to suppress the impending catastrophe. Arnold Schwarzenegger directly witnessed both boys, the legitimate heir and the hidden shadow child, growing up simultaneously within the exact same compound. The vulnerable boy in the dark was forced to wear the discarded clothes of his official half-siblings, playing in the very same backyard but occupying a fundamentally subhuman social status. Arnold watched Joseph's face alter with each passing year, as every single facial feature, bone structure, and physical dimension began mirroring his own image like a terrifying biological clone. Yet, instead of panicking, Arnold operated a silent machinery of financial manipulation, quietly raising Mildred's salary, buying her a private home in the suburbs, and converting her into permanent accomplice in the burial of truth. The true horror of the global elite system does not reside in the isolated crimes of an individual. Rather, it lies in the systematic manner with which the corporate media machinery and political brokers enthusiastically collaborate to protect the predator in order to preserve their institutional interests. When Arnold Schwarzenegger made the calculative decision to run for governor of California during the historic 2003 recall election, the Hollywood protection ring and the political gatekeepers of the Republican Party immediately activated their highest defensive protocol. Mere days before the definitive ballots were cast, the Los Angeles Times dropped a cataclysmic journalistic bomb, publishing a comprehensive forensic investigation detailing at least 6 courageous women who stepped forward to accuse Arnold of crude physical harassment, non-consensual grouping, and aggressive sexual misconduct on movie sets spanning 2 decades. In a functional, civilized society, this exposure should have marked the immediate biological retirement of any political campaign. But the elite quickly demonstrated that when hundreds of millions of dollars and systemic power are tethered to a brand name, they will happily stomp over the trauma of victims without a single shred of hesitation. Instantly, a massive psychological warfare and reputation laundering campaign was unleashed by Arnold's crisis management team. They did not merely deny the allegations. They actively weaponized loyal tabloid media networks to violently assassinate the character of these vulnerable women, painting them as money-hungry opportunists or partisan pawns manufactured to dismantle a global icon. Most disgustingly of all, the system utilized Maria Shriver as their ultimate human shield. Carrying the historic weight and moral authority of the Kennedy name, Maria stepped onto the campaign podium before millions of voters, firmly declaring that her husband was a man of supreme integrity and that the allegations were nothing but political fabrications. This profound complicity of the wife, whether forced or engineered through deep psychological manipulation, successfully suffocated the public skepticism. The California electorate, entirely hypnotized by the silver screen aura of the Terminator and the sacred endorsement of the Kennedy bloodline, chose to turn a blind eye to the cries of the victims. Arnold Schwarzenegger ascended to the gubernatorial throne of California with a smug, victorious grin. He fully understood that he had triumphed not because he was innocent, but because he possessed a shadow cabinet of corporate vultures and media manipulators who would happily devour anyone who dared to stand in his path. Throughout his 2 terms as the honorable governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger masterfully performed the role of an exemplary statesman, an eco-friendly family man protecting the environment and reforming the economy. But behind the velvet curtains of the gubernatorial office in Sacramento, the internal moral rot had advanced to a point of no return. The hidden son Joseph Baena continued to grow, and Mildred Baena continued her daily duties as the domestic maid in the family home, creating a psychological tension so thick it could asphyxiate any illusion of domestic peace. Arnold had successfully converted his life into a golden, velvet-lined prison, waking up every single morning to face the very woman who held the precise biological secret capable of vaporizing his entire political kingdom. The extreme overconfidence of an apex predator who had never lost a battle blinded Arnold to a fundamental law of reality. He failed to realize that in the grand theater of human hubris, the greatest lies always leave behind indelible biological footprints, and the very system that engineered his immunity would be the exact same system that would quietly watch him get torn apart the moment his capital value expired. The ultimate collapse of a deity never begins with a spectacular external lightning bolt. It crawls from the structural decay within, from the exact way an elite narcissist nourishes the very instrument of his own destruction right in the quiet shadows of his own house. When Arnold Schwarzenegger's gubernatorial tenure reached its official conclusion in the early months of 2011, the immaculate political mask he had meticulously manufactured began developing irreversible structural fractures. The definitive catalyst that pushed this elaborate empire of deception into absolute ruin did not materialize from an FBI forensic investigation, nor did it originate from his bitter political rivals in the opposition party. Instead, it crawled from the belated but profoundly dignified awakening of Maria Shriver. Throughout 25 years of high society marriage, this woman carrying the sacred bloodline of the Kennedy dynasty had quietly endured endless, humiliating rumors regarding her husband's aggressive infidelities. Yet, she had consistently chosen the path of strategic silence to preserve the grand family aesthetic, protect the political legacy of her ancestors, and secure the future of her children. However, the physical reality of the teenager Joseph Baena, growing up right inside the domestic compound with facial features that mirrored Arnold with an almost grotesque biological precision, became a visceral insult that Maria could no longer tolerate. In January 2011, mere days after Arnold vacated the governor's office, Maria Shriver made the calculated decision to confront Mildred Baena in an intensely emotional private interrogation. Faced with the quiet dignity of her employer, the vulnerable housekeeper collapsed into heavy tears, completely unspooling the absolute truth of that fateful night 14 years prior. The moment those words were uttered, the temporal machinery of Arnold's lies detonated. Maria immediately packed her belongings, permanently exiting the Pacific Palisades mansion and terminating one of the most formidable power marriages in modern American history, with a divorce filing that sent shockwaves across the global media landscape. The fundamental core of a deeply pathological narcissist like Arnold Schwarzenegger is their unwavering conviction that they can direct and edit the entire world, even when their own domestic kingdom has been reduced to absolute ash. When the sordid truth regarding his illegitimate shadow child erupted onto the front pages of international tabloids in May 2011, the public witnessed a truly farcical display of elite damage control. Arnold stepped before the television cameras to deliver a sterile, perfectly engineered press release drafted by top-tier crisis management consultants. In this calculated statement, he offered his deep, profound apologies to Maria and his children, boldly proclaiming that he would take absolute responsibility for the immense trauma he had inflicted. But beneath the velvet veneer of this public repentance lay a freezing, mercenary calculation designed to salvage the remaining equity of the global Schwarzenegger brand name. He did not experience a genuine moral collapse. Rather, he viewed this catastrophic domestic failure merely as a dramatic plot point for the next volume of his autobiography. Just 1 year later, in Hai, Arnold confidently published his massive memoir titled Total Recall. In a display of staggering hubris, he converted his dark sins of infidelity and familial betrayal into a best-selling consumer product, marketing his domestic cruelty as an inspirational tale of overcoming personal adversity. This supreme arrogance demonstrates that to the ruling class, even the raw trauma of their own family members is simply a monetization asset to be traded for book sales and media relevance. However, the most merciless retribution orchestrated by fate did not reside in the financial divisions of the divorce courts or the fleeting moral outrage of the public, but in the permanent biological estrangement within his own bloodline. His 4 official children with Maria Shriver, Catherine, Christina, Patrick, and Christopher, endured a profound, shattering psychological shock upon discovering that their cinematic superhero father was, in material reality, a master of systematic deception. The fragile architecture of their relationship with Arnold instantly plunged into a deep freeze. The children, identifying heavily with the pride of the Kennedy heritage, chose to form an impenetrable wall around their mother, refusing to be seen alongside their father at high-profile public gatherings and establishing a cold, unyielding emotional distance. Imagine the exquisite psychological isolation of a man who conquered every single metric of global success, accumulated vast empires of capital, yet returns to his multi-million-dollar mansion every evening only to be greeted by the suffocating silence of empty rooms and the freezing glances of his own flesh and blood. This high society solitude operates as a pristine, velvet-lined psychological prison where Arnold is forced to pay for his toxic hubris with the permanent loss of genuine human connection, a sacred asset that no amount of Hollywood capital can ever repurchase. Simultaneously, the trajectory of his hidden child, Joseph Baena, emerged as a darkly satirical commentary on the absolute laws of genetic inheritance. Despite being completely ignored and denied social recognition by his wealthy half-siblings for a significant portion of his life, Joseph was the only biological piece who inherited the absolute fullness of Arnold Schwarzenegger's legendary physical blueprint. The boy developed into adulthood with a towering physique, immaculate muscle symmetry, and a relentless passion for the iron game, perfectly replicating the golden aesthetic of Arnold during his 1970s prime at Gold's Gym. Arnold attempted to engineer a financial solution to his guilt, quietly providing massive financial support, purchasing a private home, funding elite university tuition, and frequently training with the boy in commercial gyms. But the true tragedy lies in the fact that no matter how many millions Arnold spends, Joseph Baena remains a permanent, breathing monument to his greatest historical transgression. Every time Arnold looks into the face of Joseph, he is not merely observing a loving son, he is staring directly into a living, walking biological indictment. Joseph is a physical reality, proving that Arnold's supreme power failed completely against the basic laws of human morality. To this very day, Joseph is not legally permitted to carry the sacred surname of Schwarzenegger, a cold, calculated exclusion enforced by the elite system to preserve a false illusion of purity for the official lineage. When analyzing the comprehensive trajectory of this individual, from a penniless boy in rural Austria to the absolute pinnacle of political governance in California, the life of Arnold Schwarzenegger stands as a definitive case study in the spectacular rise and moral decay of an apex narcissist. He operated his existence like a ruthless corporate conglomerate, where every single human dynamic, whether it was friendship, romance, or marriage, was evaluated solely through the mercenary lens of power transactions and asset accumulation. He masterfully weaponized the collective naivety of the masses, the systemic protection of the Hollywood entertainment machine, and the moral prestige of the Kennedy dynasty to ascend to the highest corridors of American authority. But the world of the global elite, as history repeatedly reminds us, operates on a highly Thanyan algorithm. The very moment your capital value expires and you can no longer generate profit or secure institutional immunity for the system, the gatekeepers will instantly drop their protection, leaving you completely exposed to the consequences of your own actions. Arnold Schwarzenegger was never destroyed by an external adversary. He was systematically dismantled by the weight of his own monstrous ego and his profound contempt for the natural boundaries of human decency. This represents the absolute, definitive psychological autopsy of a 20th century culture deity. Arnold spent his entire incarnation constructing an indestructible physical armor of muscle and an unassailable fortress of political influence, yet he failed catastrophically to govern the basic ethics of his own household. The true legacy that the Terminator leaves behind for future generations is not a catalog of billion-dollar blockbusters, nor is it a record of legislative policies enacted during his gubernatorial regime. Instead, it is a chilling portrait of deep moral rot hidden behind the blinding clique lights of elite society. It serves as a freezing warning to anyone who currently finds themselves intoxicated by the fumes of absolute authority. When you genuinely believe that you stand above the rules, that you can deceive everyone indefinitely, and that capital can rewrite reality, is the exact moment fate is quietly preparing its final, merciless strike to pull you back down to earth, leaving you exposed as a deeply flawed, isolated mortal, permanently imprisoned within the quiet shadows of your own hollow kingdom.